All right, guys, we are going to get started with the next part of the day here. We are going to be focusing on in-season nitrogen management. So if you guys want to work your way back to the table, we can get started. Okay, great. So, like I said, focusing on in-season nitrogen management, there can be potential for a lot of headaches behind that. You can go out and just front load everything. That's maybe not the most ideal thing to do, though. So we're very fortunate to have a great panel up here today of a few growers that have different management styles, varying from in-season nitrogen management with fertigation or in-season nitrogen management from a high clearance applicator. So multiple use cases here. So really just wanted to have this kind of be a dialogue with maybe some pain points, some things that you've noticed with in-season nitrogen management, kind of how you make it work, that type of thing. So I'll have a list of questions that I'll ask these guys, and then later on we will open it up to the audience for questions. So if you guys hear anything and maybe want more clarification on it, or just feel free to pick these guys' brains more or less. And we can go from there. So I think we'll first start off with introductions. So if you guys want to start out just giving your name, how many acres roughly you farm, how many years you've been farming, what motivates you most on your farm, and why did you start applying nitrogen in season? So, whoever wants to start first.
Can you hear me? All right, good. My name's Wayne Schote. I farm with my wife and my son in St. Edward, Nebraska, which is about 100 miles west and a little bit north from here. We've got about 1,400 acres of corn and soybeans in a 50-50 rotation. We're pretty religious about that. A lot of our ground, well, I shouldn't say a lot. Our ground is highly variable, from river bottom ground to some really steep clay hills, sometimes in the same quarter. I've been farming all of my life, but been farming full-time since about 2012. And, as time has gone on, obviously profit and efficiencies become more and more important. And that's really where what we focus on. And that's essentially why we got into the in-season nitrogen management was the cost of the nitrogen and trying to reduce those nitrogen costs.
Okay, Jesse Williams. I farm near Osceola, Nebraska, around 900 acres. It's pretty much flat, all Hastings soil, one field that's kind of sandy ground. Been farming for 5 years, so what motivates me most on my farm was one of the questions. I would say I'm an 8th generation farmer, so that comes with a lot of drive associated with that. I'm the first in that has stepped off the farm for a while, so I worked close to 20 years for Case IH as a harvesting and field service specialist for them. Then started farming full-time last year, so as far as applying nitrogen in season, the chances of less loss, and also if you do have that hail event towards the end of June, the 1st of July, and you don't have all the nitrogen out there yet, being able to save that money, save that fertilizer for the next season.
Guess I got my own. I'm Quentin Keneally. I ran this by James yesterday. I wanted to tell you I'm a second generation. Oh, no. I'm a secondhand vegetarian. So I believe in a good plant-based diet. I just have to run it through cattle first and end up on my plate, medium rare. So I farm up the river bottoms here. We're about 2,500 irrigated corn and soybeans rotations, a little bit of corn on corn. And I started a podcast about 3 weeks ago. So we're bringing ag data to our platform with grower adoption, and then about the ag tech revolution. And then, I started had a tough year about 8 years ago, and then started using my data for me and making better decisions with my fertilizer. So we have a traditional, the way stuff my dad did it, and it's always pressure to start evolving the farm. So I started bringing that to my platform and use it on the farm that way. And that's when I found Sentinel. I've been using them the last year. We've been really breaking down data-driven decisions the last 7-8 years, working on it every day, and then we bring it to a farm because we're heavily irrigated. So making decisions later, and then we're a big wind and hail area too. So just bring it to the farm and figure out how to use it right.
Thank you, guys. I guess before we start going into the questions, I think maybe one question I want to ask. Q, you already gave your answer. You've been using Sentinel for about a year now. Jesse and Wayne, how long roughly have you guys been using Sentinel for?
So this year was my 3rd year. The first year I trialed it as part of on-farm research on one field where we did side-by-side management between Sentinel and me trying to make the decisions.
This will be my 3rd year doing it. So I've been doing it for the past 2 years, and really when I discovered that the Sentinel product was out there, I jumped all in with the technology on it. I had worked with this type of technology in my years when I worked with Lindsay Manufacturing. We used to use the satellite imagery to determine how well our corner systems were watering. So I knew I was very confident that the results that we were getting and being able to see that corn stress from the technology.
Perfect. Thank you, guys. So I want to go into some of the more questions that we have for this. And first thing I want to ask is, how are you guys currently making your in-season nitrogen applications?
So yeah, up here, I'm 45 miles north in Tacoma, Nebraska. So we start with a good base a little bit in the fall. So we still do a little bit of tillage. So we start out with a base, not very much. And then at pre-emerge, we put a good chunk on to get that early 60% of the plant growth up to V12. And then we do a little side dressing yet. So we're kind of unique where I farm with my uncle, who's a little more old school, and then me and my mom are a little more progressive. So we use kind of a blanket poundage and old school buggies, 4630, 4640, pulling some buggies around there so we can knock out some acres there. And then rely heavily on my variable rate fertility with Helena. So a big program there. And then we've started adapting Y drops. My Y dropper Garrett's in the back room if you got any questions. So I saw lots of opportunity there. So we're trying to incorporate that, a little newer form, more variable rate fertility on top of those.
So I'm doing all of mine pre-plant. I do the grid sample and then do a variable rate. I'm probably over-complexing this, but I'll typically start with the phosphorus variable rate and figure out how much MAP or MES that I'm running out of that. Then do an AMS variable rate for some of my sulfur, and then I try to take the nitrogen credit from those two, plus the organic matter, plus the residual nitrate in the soil, and come up with something that's going to get me close to 100 pounds available, kind of flat line across the field, and then fertigating the rest.
We do we'll grid sample all the soils to put the dries on. We'll do our variable rate, the MAP and the lime and the potash, and we'll do all that during the winter. In season, we go right to a side dress application about V1 through V3 with the corn crop, and we'll get another base of roughly 90 to 100 pounds in that application, and then we use the Sentinel program to add anything else that we need to during the season.
Great. Another question I want to ask is, you guys all have kind of different management styles of applying nitrogen, right? So number one, have you always done split application of nitrogen in season? If you haven't, what made you switch to more of that in season approach for nitrogen management?
We've always done it. We're stuck in that 3-pass right now until we can prolong a little bit more. But that's actually the first thing I learned was how to run a side dress buggy. So when I think I was like 16, I think the uncle and dad were sick of getting out there bouncing around. So they stuck me in there, taught me how to count rows, and that was my first experience. And we still do a little bit of it today. But I just like transitioning my part to more variable rate and then make sure we get the right fertility on the right acre. But I think it still has its place. If you're new to it, you want to step into it. You don't just jump in. So it's really like they're talking grid sample. get all your data in there and learn how to use it and get the right amount of fertility on the right amount of acres. So just baby steps and start working towards it now before regulation gets here.
Yeah, so I guess I only have 4 years of corn under my belt, but the first year I did a 32 with the burn down, and then we came back and did the variable rate with urea spread on, and then fertigated the rest, I think, in a couple different fertigation passes. And that worked really well that year, but trying to cut some of the application cost out, I went to more of a one pass before planting and trying to do multiple fertigation passes, but I probably need to modify that program a little bit because the last couple of years I've run myself pretty hard trying to really spoon feed it, and I don't know that for the soil type I've got, I couldn't put a little bit heavier rates on, but we've also had some pretty challenging weather conditions the last couple of years.
10 years ago, we were 100% anhydrous ammonia in the fall or the spring, depending on how the weather worked. With the operation that we had, my dad's health issues, our labor was minimized, so I was having a hard time getting the anhydrous on, just myself. Decided to go to a liquid program where the co-op was helping me out, CVA was helping me out. Through those years, we were slowly transitioning a lot of gravity irrigated ground to pivots, and that's really, once we got the pivots, that's where I was able to go more in season and utilize those pivots to get the nitrogen on that way.
Great. What factors make in-season nitrogen application most challenging to execute logistically on your operation?
Yeah, I would say the weather windows the last couple of years, or really every year that I've done it's been a big one. You know, I think if we could get everybody in Nebraska to go to fertigating, we would probably not need the pivots anymore the way it seems to work. But yeah, that's been a challenge. And then, you know, me trying to do a lot of pretty much everything by myself with just a little bit of help from my dad. Just the labor availability of moving fertilizer tanks around, getting fertilizer tanks in and out of the field, trying to catch up with the fertilizer vendors and get what I need at the right time. So those are kind of the challenges for me.
I would say weather is absolutely the thing. You with pivot, with fertigation, you have to be okay with running your pivot when nobody else is after you just got an inch of rain, because Sentinel's saying go ahead and put some fertilizer on. So you learn how to run them fast and hope nobody makes fun of you for doing it. But it's like you talked about too. It's also the equipment, moving it around, you know, because typically every field needs nitrogen at the same time. So you've got some logistics there.
Yeah, I still boil it down to weather too. And then like we're on the river bottom, so we're right up the river, but we catch a lot of the Iowa rain. So that's why we unhooked a lot of the chemigation stuff back in the day. I've never been around it, so I don't get the experience like these guys. So we really base it on that urea, and then we get plentiful rains over here. So we just separate it and you manage it, and then you have a game plan. You always want a game plan, and just like Jackson was talking about earlier with our halftime pivots, we got to go one direction or the other, but it works. And then labor's getting harder to find, so that's why you find a good retailer, you find people you trust and who work on your system, and that takes a little pressure off you, so you can enjoy some time out there running your rigs.
Sure. Now, you talk a lot about the, just how difficult it is to manage in-season nitrogen. You touched on that. Wayne, you said using Sentinel in season kind of helps you out. Are there any other things that you guys are looking at changing in your operation to help maybe smooth over those bottlenecks a little bit and just make it easier for you to manage nitrogen in season?
The main thing that I've done logistically is we've essentially got every well set up with its own tank, its own pump. Not quite. I still got one well to do, but that has taken me almost 5 years to do that, because there's a lot of capital investment to get every well set up with its own system. But like I said, it invariably, all the cornfields need nitrogen right now. And I could not justify having systems wait a week to 10 days before we got around to all of them. So that's been one of the biggest things.
Yeah, I'd kind of say the same thing. I am probably looking at maybe taking some of the quarters that I have that I'm splitting corn beans and getting permanent tanks on them, maybe permanent pumps set on up on them. I got a lot of 80s though, so it's a little harder, like you were saying, to justify having that expense at every one of your 80s. I've got one portable cart that I own that I use that's set up with the pump on it that I can move around pretty easily, and then get the nurse tanks from the fertilizer vendors. They'll typically let you borrow them, and I've made some adapters where I can just back them in and hook the pump up to the hose on the bottom of them. So that's worked decent, but if I'm looking at trying to get some higher rate side in one pass, probably going to need some bigger tanks than the 700-gallon portable one that I've got right now.
What was the question?
What are you doing today to just help fix those bottlenecks that you have with in-season nitrogen management?
We're trying new things. I think that's why wide drop fits me, because I'm not in the fertigation part, but just being able to get access to those fields later, lengthen out that application, and we're still moving acres into that. It'll be a process and make sure it works with my applicator. And then we still have gate pipe irrigation, so we have a shorter window, so we got to get some of that stuff on earlier so we can get the pipe out and get it irrigated. We haven't had to transition to pivots yet. I'm just kind of working on that, just the way our fields lie and grades and stuff. So just little things like that make up for it.
Sure. Where you guys are at, are any of you facing like any regulatory issues? Are the NRDs coming down and saying, you can only apply this much nitrogen, or there's maybe a time frame when you can apply nitrogen? Are you facing anything from a regulatory side of things that makes nitrogen management in season difficult?
We're not yet. I know they prefer split application methods, but I've had a little bit of word there is the nitrates in our water are getting a little high. So I just like to stay ahead of the curve and start watching our nitrogen now before we are regulated. So we're exploring our avenues there, but right now we're not irrigated for how much water we can pump or how much nitrate we can put on, but I'll be working with UNL a little bit on some CSP programs this year to better get my nitrogen in there and due to regulation. So.
Yeah, one of the NRDs I'm in, we do have to report. We're in a phase 2, I think, so we've got to report and do the nitrogen planning each year, which is pretty simple. If you've got corn on corn, you do have to take a deep nitrate sample, which I've kind of tried to incorporate that in on all of the fields just to kind of try to get an idea, and a couple deep nitrate samples, going that 8 to 24 inch range, kind of what you've got down there for nitrate. But yeah, I do think it's probably coming eventually. I've got one farm that is one of the test locations, and so they send me the report from NRD, and that one in a year's time went up, I think, about 20% on the amount of nitrate in the water. So that is a little concerning.
Right now, we are not regulated at all on the nitrogen use or the water use right where I am at. I fully anticipate that we're going to at some point in the future, and that's kind of we've been pushing to just be prepared for that. And the combination of putting the pivots out there for the water management and then using the in-season fertigation is preparation for that.
Do you guys manage field to field or within field variability with your in-season nitrogen applications? And if you are, how are you doing that?
Yes, we are. With our pivots, I think we get it dialed in the irrigation part, and then me and my agronomist study the soil wetness index, so our ability for that acre to hold water and nutrients. So that's a big one on our radar, being on the river bottoms. And then, yeah, that's about the extent of what we do.
Yeah, like I said, most of my variable rate I do up front to try to get a fairly flat baseline before we start fertigating. We did put a couple fields in the Sentinel Complete last year. I don't think we had enough variability that we ever did very much for a variable application with the pivot, though.
I have not been doing a lot of variable rate on the nitrogen side of things. We do field to field. Most everything gets, like I said at the beginning, about that 90 to 100 pounds of base nitrogen with the side dresser, and then again the in-field management or field to field, we use the Sentinel to determine when we need to apply that in season. fertigation shot, but we're not doing any really variable rate with nitrogen in the fields themselves.
Are you guys doing any type of like soil sampling early in the season to kind of get what your baseline is going into the next growing season?
Yeah, we do a lot in the fall. So we get a good start there so we know where to base to start out of. And then the nitrogen prices this year, we've kind of cut that upfront application coming into this season. So we're looking for that. And then, yeah, grid sampling, it's kind of a rotation. We're just keep adding more acres to it every year. And then get on that good rotation, know where you're keeping an eye on, know where you're at. And then we started doing some tissue sampling with Helena throughout the growing season. So we can kind of make some adjustments through there if we need to. Sometimes they're not early enough. But at least we know where we're at and where we need to look at for next year.
Yeah, so I'm grid sampling typically every time before I go into corn, unless it's corn on corn, and then I kind of run more off of the previous grid sample, which I'd had one field that was new to me. I didn't have grid samples on this year that had corn on it 2 years. I grid sampled that, did a variable rate that seemed like it worked pretty good. I had another field that was in a second year of corn that I just went off the previous one, and that one I felt like walking it. I was seeing some spots where I had a little bit more yellowing in spots. So I think in that case, I'd either been better off to spend the money and grid sample it again, or just go with a little bit higher upfront rate of nitrogen.
We've been doing the grid sampling on all of our acres since 2012 or 2013, I believe, and we've got all the farms in about a 4-year rotation of grid sampling. And then each year we'll go back and we'll pick specific spots in each field and take 4 or 5 samples each year and compare them to the grid the previous year and see if we need to adjust our recommendation and applications for the MAP and the lime and the potash. The nitrogen side of it, I don't use the grid sampling to manage the nitrogen side of things. That's just for the phos and the potash and the lime.
What's something you know now that you wish you understood better when you started applying nitrogen in season?
The efficiencies you can find from it. I mean, I didn't know much about the NUE that Bob talked about earlier till I started breaking this down 5 or 6 years ago. And then just using Sentinel this year. I mean, we got some of our numbers. Some of the home run fields, we get down in that 0.85 to 0.89 before. And then, we lost a lot of plot. We had Mother Nature throws a wrench and everything. So we have all these plans with nitrogen, and then we got hail, wind, and then southern rust moving in. So it really put a hiccup in the rest of my studies down south. But some of those numbers are in the 1 to 1.1. So just start to watch the efficiencies and get at it now before it's too late.
It's kind of a tough one because my first year, my fertigated corn averaged like 300 bushels, and I've been downhill since. So I guess it was beginner's luck. But definitely working with the Sentinel and kind of getting that closed loop on the system where you do get a little bit of feedback on how much you need to put out there in season, and if you do need to put more out, and trying to get that nitrogen use efficiency a little bit higher there.
I think the costs of everything is always forefront in my mind. When we first started out, I had no idea what the cost of all the pivot equipment would be, what the side dressing equipment would be. We stepped into it knowing that it was the right thing to do, but not realizing that, it takes a commitment to do this. And when you start investing, $5,000 a well to get everything set up correctly, if you want each well to stand independent on its own, so you're not moving a bunch of equipment around, that takes time. Like I said, we still are not completely set up with every well completely, but had I understood the efficiencies that you gain in the nitrogen management, I probably would have been much, much more aggressive than what I was, and just said, okay, we're going to commit to do this and go after it a lot quicker than we did.
You guys got me kind of interested. What are some of the better nitrogen use efficiencies that you've seen since you started doing a split application?
I'd say it's still this year on the home run field. I mean, we got it down in that 0.85 to 0.9, and I thought that was pretty impressive for what we're working with down there. And then, we're really flat. So, we got to watch that leaching and volatilization with the urea we use. So, that's probably my best one. And then I don't know, the other, I just wish we had more data. I mean, I liked your data plots out there. That was nice and interesting to see where we can cut back and where that fine tune that program. So.
What was the question again?
What were some of the better nitrogen use efficiency numbers that you've seen
Oh.
since the split application?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say probably I'm typically running in about that 0.8 range most of the time. I've had some fields, if you kind of start to break it down and take out some of your, where the old barn site was, or, the low spot that flooded out, you're probably getting down a little bit lower than that 0.6 to 0.7 range. So definitely had some pretty decent ones compared to what you hear at the coffee shop that other guys are putting on for total nitrogen and what they're getting back for yield.
Just looking back across the years, I actually put some of this information together. This is across our entire farm, all our farms, whether it's irrigated or dry land. Prior to doing the in-season fertigation, we were putting on roughly 250 pounds an acre across everything. I mean, and back then we were even adding quite a bit of nitrogen even in the dry land acres because we were getting some rain back then. The years are very weird anymore, I've noticed. But this year and I wouldn't have been able to do this without the Sentinel product, our per acre nitrogen across all acres was 115 pounds. So we went from a 1.13 in UE when we were putting on 250 pounds down to a 0.49 or 0.5. And that's across the entire farm. If you dialed into just the pivot itself, it would probably be in that 0.6 to 0.65, I think. So, but I was just looking all acres completely under the farm umbrella.
Great. Where have you guys had to compromise to make your system manageable for you?
I'd say with our timing window, we just have to make sure we don't want to stress the crop, so we have to make sure we have that certain amount up front. And it's a gamble, especially with the weather and Mother Nature as is right now. You want that base layer to begin with, and then you can make the adjustments later if you can still get in there. So that's the biggest part, just that upfront base to get the crop going is where you got to compromise a little bit depending on your operation. But that's where we see it.
Yeah, I would say probably that up front, and then you tie it in with weather-related issues. So, last year we had pretty significant rains. I think about the time I got ready to start fertigating, I called the fertilizer guy, had him load me a tank, and I was going to take it out the next morning, and a 2/10 forecast turned into a 4-inch and about 2-hour rain that night. So got dried out over a week and then got another 7 inches of rain. So had some pretty yellow corn, which is pretty depressing because you hear David Hula say, never let your corn have a bad day, which is a terrible thing to say for farmers' mental health. But pulled both of them back pretty decent with the fertigation. And, other than some varieties that had some southern rust issues, a lot of what we saw underneath the pivot was in that 250, 260 range. So not too bad considering how it looked for a little while there.
I would say the main compromise for us was just the implementation costs and not doing everything at once and trying to make things work with limited amounts of equipment to begin with. Also the weather. I mean, it's just amazing how it can be dry and then all of a sudden it's wet. And again, like I said earlier, just being willing to go out there and run that pivot when you don't need the water. You need the nitrogen and figure out how to run it fast.
Okay, one more question for you guys before I turn it over to the audience. How do you manage fertilizer procurement and storage for in-season nitrogen applications? If we're looking at it from a cost perspective at different points of the year, and then just having all that having that fertilizer on hand and available to you. How are you managing that today?
No, we still rely heavily on a retailer, whether it be Helena or we got a good private retailer in town. We rely heavily on them because I don't like to handle it and really not set up on our farm to do that. We usually put up grain storage is where we benefit, and then we're usually busy chasing pivots or ditching corn too. So it's good to put a little bit of responsibility on them to hold that for us. And then they're pretty good to us. We've had a long-term relationship with them, so they're pretty good to us and don't jack us too much on pricing later on if they have to hold it all. But I don't know, just find people that work with you, will work into your operation and want to work with you, because it's a big thing. If you don't have the infrastructure to put that on your facility, work good with somebody and honor them and make it right.
Yeah, so I kind of been doing the same thing, which works okay, but I guess the frustration with it is it always seems like you need fertilizer on a Saturday afternoon or something like that. Just kind of the way the schedule works, or they don't have maybe the blend you want. They got 32 but not thiazole. There's nobody there on a Wednesday afternoon to load a tank. So I do have a used, I think, 8,000 gallon tank that I picked up that I'm going to get set up. So that'll help simplify things for next year, just being able to have a fairly decent amount that I can run back to a central location and load off of.
I've been using the retailers in the area. Typically, we'll just rent a couple pop-up tanks so that we can take a semi-load in on the farm. And then I've got a nurse tank that I chase around to all the pivots and fill the tanks at the pivot points. I personally would like to get some on-farm storage, get a couple 5,000 gallon tanks so that I can hold the product longer. Just for what you said, when it's time to go and it's a Saturday, I don't want to have to bug anybody. I just want to be able to fill the tanks up and go.
Great, thank you guys. Really enlightening stuff here. I think next we'll kind of turn it over to the audience. If you guys have any questions for the panel here, Jack Tickner has a microphone. So if you just went, and so does Dylan, and so is Jackson. We got the whole room covered here. So if you guys have any questions that you want to ask the panel, just raise your hand. I see we got one right up front here.
I want to direct this question at Jesse. You commented on the color of the corn, not this year when it was yellow, but you had some areas of the field where you saw some nitrogen deficiency or yellow leaves lower. Do you think that impacted yield, and what do those fields look like at dough early dense stage? How many lower leaves are yellowing or senescing later in the season?
Yeah, so on that one, the one I was talking about, we saw some spotty ones. That was a second-year corn, and we were running off an older grid sample, a 2-year-old grid sample. Probably seeing a couple leaves up that got fairly yellow on that, and that was right before we started fertigating. It was a little difficult to figure it out. I mean, you could walk across your high and low Sentinel plots and then into your regular plot, and it didn't really seem like it really lined up with a varying rate. When we harvested it, I haven't had James process the data for me yet, but I mean, it almost seemed like the low rate plots were as or maybe slightly better at harvest. So I don't think it was a huge yield hit. Some of what I was seeing may be compaction. So, I don't know if that's something with the Sentinel. You can kind of try to pinpoint some spots in the field that maybe look like they do have some deficiencies and go out there and do a little scouting with a soil probe or something like that and try to see what you got there.
Yeah, Jason.
Have any of you realized a nitrogen use efficiency number that's low to the point where you feel like it's negatively affected yields? Is the first part of the question. Second part is, as you've become more efficient, has it affected how you purchase your nitrogen, whether you contract early, how much you might contract early, things like that?
To date, I have not noticed that any of the yield issues that we have seen out in the field is due to the nitrogen. I mean, we've the last 4 years we've dealt with drought, we've dealt with disease. This past year, I don't want to say we dealt with too much rain, but we got timely rains. Who's heard of that? I mean, all season in my area, we got timely rains. You bring up an interesting point as far as with the Sentinel use, how to purchase nitrogen. Part of the reason I would like to have the on-farm storage is I have purchased more nitrogen than what I've needed the last 2 years, and now I've got a bunch of tanks full of 28 because I had to go out there and fill them with, put some water in them so they didn't salt out over the winter. And I'd like to consolidate all that into one area instead of keeping them at the pivot points.
Yeah, I've still kind of been trying to prepay on a lot of it just to take some of the discounts, but it's kind of hard to say with some of the volatility as far as, you know, you better off to prepay or you get till everybody's done side dressing and maybe the price falls off a little bit then. So it's just kind of a gamble on that. I think no matter what you do, I'd rather not have it sitting at my place in a tank. I'd rather have it sitting at the fertilizer vendor in a tank and my money sitting in the bank, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, a younger producer, I like to hold on to my money a little bit, so we contract a little bit less. But then, I don't know, with the variable rate, I mean, we're bringing down our nitrogen use a little bit, but we're utilizing it better. We're putting it on the right acre, in the right spot, and cutting back where we need to. So that's one way to look at it. Then from there, I think that's it.
Great. Yeah, Ethan here really quick.
You guys all kind of talked about making changes on your farm. What was the catalyst that made you make the changes to try Sentinel out on your own farm?
I lost a lot of money in 2018 and wanted to rejump my operation. So I started breaking it down. I added a team, so I had a lot of people. I got agronomists, I got a marketing guy, I got a finance guy. I was trying to do it all alone. It didn't work out for me. So I revamped and started making my data work for me. And then I help with grower adoption. I bring companies out to my farm, and then I talk about it on socials. So got other incomes coming in. It just takes one hard year, and you start revisioning it, and it re-jump starts you. So
I guess I started with the fertigation, and since I only got 4 years of corn, and like I said earlier, just kind of due to spreading it out, spreading the cost out, having a little bit more security as far as if you do have a hail event or something like that. But the first year I did it, I worked with the on-farm research. I had just gone out when I started farming to NRCS and trying to figure out some ways to bring in a little bit of additional income. At that time, I was only farming 80 acres, and then have grown since then. But found the on-farm research, and they had a paid trial that year to do some of their models beside a grower model. And so we did that the first year with that side-by-side, and then just asked what was available for the next year, and that was where the Sentinel popped up. So did that the next year. We got through some struggles with co-op not getting the initial application on right for the test strips, and I think that was a learning experience that led to the blocks that we got now. And we started working with the wedges that year with the high rate and low rate through the pivot, and just saw the value of it once I did that.
Probably the thing that if you want to talk about a specific moment in time that made me decide I really needed to manage it better, we started with the fertigation when we started putting the pivots on. I in my gut I always knew we were putting too much nitrogen on when we were doing the anhydrous applications. Nitrogen was a lot cheaper when I first started farming. I think if I remember correctly, in '95, I think you could buy a pound of nitrogen in anhydrous right around 12 cents, maybe 14 cents, somewhere in there. So it was a lot cheaper back then. So we had to graduate to the fertigation or the in-season application to save some money. I knew we needed to cut back and started to cut back, but wasn't sure if cutting back was the right thing to do because I really didn't have a good way to monitor what was going on in the field. The specific moment in time when I decided I had to do something different was I went out to check a pivot. Pivot's running, but the fertilizer pump shut off, and I'm like going, where did that shut off? So do I trust that it just shut off and I don't need to reapply nitrogen, or do I protect that 80 acres or 40 acres or however many acres and just do another pass? And I said it was just getting too difficult to manage a high dollar product without any feedback, and that's where I found the Sentinel and it helps me sleep a lot better. How's that?
I think we had one more question up front here.
Thank you, gentlemen. Question is whether for anybody who has more lighter soils, do you guys use anything up front or with fertigation like humic acid to help stabilize the nitrogen so it's not moving near as much within the soil?
Yeah, we use a lot of hydrohume with Helena, so stabilize it. So we use a lot of that. And then our stuff by the river, we started using cover crops, as you can tell from my pretty picture. That was like 7 acres I planted in green, so it's pretty cool for me. But I'm come from a tillage background. But yeah, we have found stabilizers to work well, especially with the leaching we can find. So especially on our bottoms. But yeah, I'm a believer in it.
I have not used anything like that yet. I do have one field that is sandy ground that we have in a biochar experiment with UNL for next year. So we went out and put like 2.5 tons of biochar, or no, 7 tons of biochar, I think it was, on 2.5 acres. So that'll be kind of interesting to see what that does on that sandy land. That's kind of a throw everything at it with the carbon and see what happens, I guess.
I am not using any nitrogen stabilizers. Even the river bottom ground that we have is not highly sandy. It's still a pretty heavy silt loam soil.
I think we have time for maybe one more question. I think I saw one maybe back there.
So, question to Wayne. What, 10 years ago when you switched from anhydrous, what was the key factor that made you switch? At that time, we had, I just couldn't get across the acres. I was running a lot of cow calves. We were busy with cows, weaning calves in the fall, so that took up any time then. In the spring, you're busy calving. Just could not get it done. And at that point, really didn't want to buy the horsepower or the rig to feel like I could get across those acres either. So it was that was a point at which I went to the CVA and said, "You guys put it on with a sprayer." I did not like that at all either, because we didn't have enough pivots at that time to water the nitrogen in a little bit too either. So it was just a lot of things snowballed all at once.
Alexa, I think you had a question, maybe?
Yeah, sorry. I was just wondering if any of you were or are in any like cost share programs that you felt like were helpful in making any of these decisions or motivating you to do anything. And on the flip side, if there was any programs that you were in that you just didn't like, that you were like, what are they asking? It's too much information. I don't want to do this. Sorry, that was kind of a loaded question, or I guess a lot of questions.
So yeah, I just got started with CSP programs through NRCS. So I'm still in the implementation stage. So I should have them all ready for this year for the first growing season. But that's my first adventure. I do irrigation management, nutrient management, and then cover cropping, trying to get some better organic matter out in our fields by the river. So that's my first adventure. I've played a little bit with Cargill's programs, but not as big a fan as those. Sorry if you're from Cargill. But that's starting to get our network. So I've got to talk to a lot of people. Use your network and find out what's working for guys in your area, because there's some opportunities. And I got started in the combine this last spring, and that's where I met Sentinel and the on-farm research. So start beating down doors and find some opportunities to get some more money on your farm, because it's not easy to find right now.
Yes. So I put all my fields in that nitrogen reduction program last year, and a little bit difficult because there wasn't a lot of past reporting in the NRDs. So I think some of it went off modeling, and it seemed to be a lot of variability in, this one field that I had converted from dry land that had like a 230 pound base. And then there was another one that the guy that had been farming it was running like 230, 240 on that one. And, that one, I think they gave me like 190 initially, and we did go back and get that modified. And then another one that I had in Sentinel 2 years ago, so that one had a fairly low base. And then some of them, they're wanting you to go out if you don't have a lot of history and do like the UNL nitrate calculator. So you take that deep sample. If you pick the one spot in the field that's got high nitrates on your deep sample, it's kind of throwing your whole recommended rate down. So you start getting some recommendations back on some fairly low rates. So I think of what I put in the system, I think I met it on probably about 60% of the field. So I did get a little bit of money out of it. It helped a little bit, paid for the time it took to take the record keeping and all that.
I never used any cost sharing programs to get the system set up. I know there's flow meter cost share programs out there with NRCS and other things. We did enroll all the corn acres last year in the Nitrogen Reduction Act and submitted all that information in December, and everything checked out. We met the target reduction rate for the nitrogen. I submitted this year 2026's corn acres into that program this year. I don't know if we'll meet the reduction because the past history on those farms, we've already reduced the nitrogen quite a bit. So we'll see what the year brings. Also do a little do cover cropping with the Cargill program. I happen to get along with them. No, I'm just kidding. That's been an interesting learning curve also.
I do get along with them. They're just short on my side, it seems like.
So yeah, I think with the nitrogen reduction thing, the thing that kind of frustrated me on it is, I checked with the local fertilizer guys and was like, what's your average rate? And if you take their average rate, what I put on the ones that didn't qualify, I'm still probably 15% below what they're putting on the average field. So it's not really incentivizing the guys that are out there trying to cut the nitrogen, and the ones that aren't trying, I think, are skeptical enough that they're not going to try. So it's not really incentivizing the cheerleaders, I guess.
Okay, well, I think I maybe saw a couple more questions out there. Unfortunately, I think that we're out of time, though. So I just want to thank you guys for coming up here today and being willing to share a little bit about your operation. A lot of good information passed around today. So really, thank you guys for taking the time to come up here.